Today, we will be taking a look at the War of 1812. There are a number of causes to the War of 1812 that stem all the way back from George Washington. Let's take a look at them.
The first and second cause of the War of 1812 were the issue of impressment and our merchant vessels being taken. The U.S. was still angry over the fact that Great Britain was not respecting American neutrality as well as our freedom. They kept taking our sailors off our ships and forcing them into the British Navy. They would also interfere greatly with our trade and our ability to make money.
As seen in the War of 1812 testimony worksheet that we did, cause 3 is the British were provoking the Native Americans in the Northwest Territory into attacking American settlements. Just like Felix Grundy said, they were attacking the innocent women and children, as well as the men. Cause 4 is the American desire for more land, also known as American expansionism. Expanding west and into the Northwest Territory was not enough for most Americans. Some U.S. citizens wanted to expand into Canada, but how could this be a cause for war? The British were actually set up in Canada and owned most of it at this time. Another cause to the War of 1812 was the conflict between the political parties. Some Democratic Republicans, or Jefferson's party, were called war hawks because they preferred to go to war with Great Britain. Some of these members were John C. Calhoun and Henry Clay, who will come up time and time again when talking about states' rights issues later this year, so please remember their names. Also, not all Americans wanted to declare war. They were called doves, and these were mostly Federalists. With the election of 1808, James Madison became our 4th president. As Madison finished his term, he suggested a more aggressive approach, and he asked Congress to declare war. This greatly differs from Thomas Jefferson's approach because Jefferson thought that passing the Embargo Act would get the British to stop impressing our sailors. This clearly did not work. When the war begins, it begins in Canada. In 1812, America was largely unprepared for another war with England. Detroit was the first city captured by the British in Michigan, and the U.S. failed to capture Montreal, which is located in Canada. In 1813, a man named Oliver Hazard Perry of the United States defeated the British on Lake Erie and won back Detroit. So it's clear we're getting better as the years press on. The Native Americans at this time both sided with the United States and the British.
This war was fought on land as well as at sea. The U.S. Navy was badly outnumbered, and it only had about 16 ships due to the decrease by Thomas Jefferson. The British Navy was far superior and the largest navy in the world at this time. The British were successful at blockading the Chesapeake and Delaware Bays, and by the end of 1813, most American ships were stuck in those ports, even our trading vessels. One of the most famous battles of the War of 1812 was the Battle of Baltimore. The British were marching to Fort McHenry, located in Baltimore, and America successfully defended the fort from both land and sea. The reason why this battle is so important and so famous is because this is where Francis Scott Key wrote the Star-Spangled Banner. Another famous event during the War of 1812 was the burning of the Capitol by the British. In 1814, the British were going up and down the East Coast burning and raiding towns. When they came to Washington, D.C., in retaliation for the U.S. burning a governor's home in Canada, they decided to burn the White House, Capitol, and other assembly buildings. Madison and the federal officials had to flee, but they did not do so before Dolly Madison, Madison's wife, saved a portrait of George Washington. The last battle of the War of 1812 was the Battle of New Orleans. The Americans were led by General Andrew Jackson, who was a very successful general with many defeats of Native Americans and marched to New Orleans to defeat the British. The battle occurred on January 8, 1815, where he defeated the British at the Battle of New Orleans. Hundreds of British troops will lose their lives in this battle, but only a handful of Americans will die. The Treaty of Ghent ended the War of 1812. It was signed on December 24, 1814 in Ghent, Belgium. This treaty declared an armistice, or an end to fighting. This means there was no clear victor of this war. It also did not have a term to end impressment, but many Americans were eager for peace. The ironic thing about this treaty was the fact that it occurred before the last battle of the war, which was the Battle of New Orleans. The reason why this happened was because news traveled very slow back then. The Battle of New Orleans occurred a month after the treaty was signed. After the war ended, the British and Americans reached some other agreements. In 1817, they created the Rush-Bagot Agreement, which limited the number of warships on the Great Lakes. The purpose was to stop any further conflict from occurring in this area. In 1818, the United States and Great Britain also set up a boundary of the Louisiana Territory and Canada at the 49th parallel, which you will see on your screen on the map. They also agreed to jointly occupy the Oregon Territory for 10 years. After those 10 years, the United States end up with this territory. This will be the last time we really have an issue with Great Britain, as they are one of our biggest allies today.